Zenaida will be moderating this panel that brings together Mrs. Catherine Taudet from the ADB in Manila, Mr. René van Berkel from the UNIDO representative in South Asia, as well as Mr. Thomas, I believe, yes, from the ASEAN SCR network. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And I trust we also have Mr. Mushtaq Menon online with us. Can I have a confirmation, please, for that? So, wonderful, Mushtaq. Well, we should wave at you from this time. So we have a hybrid meeting with one of our panelists being online, and one of our colleagues is coming, Kai Hoffman, who represents GSZ and also is a circular economy specialist and big promoter. Kai, would you join us, please, on the stage? Yes.
You can hear me, Zenaida.
Well, let us try to make the first step on the journey of demystifying circular economy by asking René and Mushtaq, representatives of respectively UNEP, who is Mushtaq, which is an agency which is a original parent of the concept of SCP and big promoter of circular economy. And also René, who is a representative of United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which clearly working with issues of circularity and SCP, particularly through the private sector. So the first question goes to both of them and not to other panelists. They will be brought in as a next stage. And the question would be, what advantages you see in introducing circular economy concept and associated strategies as well, in addition to SCP, or in other words, what will be changed if we introduce SCP, in addition to SCP, into your area of activity or into your area of expertise? Mushtaq, may I just start with you as probably the most profoundly remote from us now. Mushtaq, please.
Yeah, can you hear me? Good afternoon, and I'm sorry I couldn't join because I had a little bit of...
Can we do something about the sound? Mushtaq, can you please hold on a second? We have a problem with hearing you. Colleagues, can anything be done?
Wait, let me do also something.
Please go ahead. No.
Is it?
Well, Mushtaq, we can hear you, but the sound is not very clear. It's if you are sitting in a little barrel.
Okay, let me try to not.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Okay,
thank you.
Sorry.
Please start.
Yeah. So I took off mic and lights, so it's a bit dark now, but it's okay. Okay, so thank you very much, and yeah. So basically, when we are talking about the circular economy and as SCP, so yesterday also I mentioned, and basically SCP is a medicine for everything. You talk at the three planetary crises: climate change, natural loss, pollution. You talk the Paris Agreement, you talk the SDGs, any SDG per se. So basically, sustainable consumption and production in any sector is the really required to make it happen. And to make this SCP work, circular economy is one of the best mechanisms we have come across. Now, if we look on our Switch Asia activities, and though we did a lot on the circular economy, including the youth and leadership academies, including gender and circular economy, including the sector specific like sustainable food systems, plastics, transport, and so on. But I would just put a very key areas here for everyone to think about, that when we are talking about moving to the net zero or the carbon neutrality targets, for example, when we are moving to about the natural disasters, like as we mentioned in Pakistan, for example, or in Europe, like droughts and so on. So when we are talking about the pollution impacts to reduce the even marine litter and all this, the new resolutions are coming into place and so on. So when we are talking about all this, how circular economy, so basically we are talking about lowering the footprints of human activities. And lowering the human footprints means we need to increase the efficiency of our products and services, and also convert our products and services in a way that they are self-sustainable, like you see now new like a shared economy models per se, no? That we can share the offices, we can share the cars, we can share like many spaces and services and so on. And number two is the longevity of the products and so on, like the right to repair and so forth. That's also there, for example. And then there's also the types of the materials, products that can have a prolonged life, but also easy to reuse, easy to recycle and so on. But this whole everything really evolves when we're talking about the behaviors, whether it be the political will, political behaviors, whether it be the societal behaviors, like consumer behaviors, whether it be the private sector or producer behaviors. Now, those behaviors are challenged by the perceptions, by the fears, and so on, by the unknowns. And that is where I think Switch Asia is trying to bring the unknowns to the knowns, that we know that this is a way, and this is much easier way rather than the way or the conventional path we have done in the consumption and production and so on. So we improve the quality of life. Like 92% of the Asia Pacific population is exposed to the air pollution. And again, the solution for air pollution lies in the circular economy. When you're talking about the transport systems, whether it is a choice editing, how many kilometers we really need to travel and how we need to travel, what equipment we need to travel, what mode of transport and how that mode is energized, for example, and so on. So I think this is where, whether energy sources and anything with the air pollution, my point is that anywhere we need to convert unknowns into the knowns to really make the circular economy as a household thing at every country and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mushtaq. So that's really an interesting, almost poetic perspective. So circular economy is really becoming revealed and concretized through SCP. So it's in itself, according to you, demystifying concept or demystifying strategy. Thank you very much. Also, thank you for revisiting the whole systemic perspective of the SCP. René, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think I would like to make basically 3 points. First point is very much a reiteration of what Mushtaq is saying, that I think the circular economy is the first time that we bring the triple planetary crisis together. So it is that if we want to do something about climate change, about pollution and waste and nature and loss of biodiversity, we have to address the resource flows and get them circular. So in that sense, it is converging agenda for what is the changes that are needed in the industrial system, in all the economic systems. The second point I wanted to make is that circular is also endless and it's also zero. So it really re-emphasizes that the goal is actually zero. Zero means nothing to waste. And I think that's also re-emphasized by commitments in Glasgow, that nothing less than zero is enough. And so we need to get away in the language which we have had for SCP, minimize, prevent, It is just about eliminate. And I think that is a different perspective that we bring now after 30 years after Rio, when the SCP agenda was first released. So we don't have to discuss about targets. We know a target is basically zero, nothing less than that is enough. My third point is basically a bit of a, maybe a slightly more negative point, that circular economy still means many things, different things to different people. And so many people get very comfortable with equating circular economy as a recycling economy. And that is actually the biggest threat to the concept of this recycling, of the circular economy. Because the circular economy is really, if we embrace it as a concept, it is an innovation concept. So we talk about innovating in production systems, in consumption systems, in products, technologies that ultimately deliver them perhaps the three objectives of circularity. So keeping everything in continuous loops, perpetual loops, not just one recycling item, but so that we put fly ash in the road, but what's going to happen with the road? So we need to think in these systems, sequential recycling cycles, but that will become much easier if we have less staff, so that's the resource efficiency agenda, or if we use materials that can be cycled back into nature, so that's the renewables agenda. So I think that this would be the biggest challenge. We are kind of, and I use this on purpose, there's a tendency to romanticize recycling under the purpose of a circular economy, and that's the biggest threat to the circular economy as a concept for innovating towards a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, René. So we know now that circular economy is about perpetual, ideally, movement of the energy/materials in the system. It is about renewables or less harmful input, and it is, of course, about circularity, but without reducing it to the mere recycling. And of course, the goal of zero is the ultimate goal. Thank you very much. So we now move to another question to all of the panelists, which would be from your perspective, and Thomas, we will start with you. Where are the core strategies for upscaling SCP work in the region? And colleagues, please keep in mind that our panelists represent different perspectives, different sectors. So you might want also to emphasize from what angle you're coming, so that we understand the prehistory of your thinking a little bit as well.
Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. My perspective is research my organization, ASEAN CSR Network, did with support from the National University of Singapore, funded by the Hans Heidel Foundation. We did a baseline study on sustainable consumption and production in ASEAN, the 10 ASEAN countries. We took the perspective from the consumer and what is the consumer's reaction towards climate change. So we traveled 3 areas, the carbon dioxide footprint for consumer goods, energy efficiency, and also guidance on recycling. Is that such things? Some of the conclusions we talk about, implications, is this: the sustainable consumption and production. I think I like the word used in SDGs. They call it responsible consumption and production. Would actually answer some of the many challenges that we actually face. The challenges of overproduction of waste, and there is in ASEAN there is no proper. There's a short gap between all the 10 countries are very different, and there are different levels of development, different levels of labeling, different levels of standards, etc. There's huge problems, but it solves the climate change problem. It resolves the issue of overproduction of waste, which is also the lack of facilities to manage disposable of waste, carbon emissions, and there's also this whole thinking that economic development means more waste. The more your economy grows, you have to create more waste, and that is it. So the recycling story is true, but I think the advantage of SCP is you do more with less, and you increase. You also solve the economic development will have to be increased in demand. So the implications are that number one, actually it solves many of these problems. It can manage many of these problems. The other one is the whole question of resource efficiency, that you can do more with less, and you can also change the way, create less waste. But I think it also comes back to the other question of there must be a sustainable lifestyle change, because demand for these products, demand for the way it's done, is also a question of our lifestyles. So in order for that, we talk about sustainable consumption, should also be talked about. And there's productivity gains, which would naturally result in efficiency and profits for the company. So the implications are that you can make more money if you are more efficient, and eventually it happens. So that is in essence what I'm saying. But in order to do that, we'll come to these points that everybody must speak the same language. What do you mean by production? When you talk about this, what are the standards? What are the levels that you want to talk about? What about labels? Because you need to have an informed consumer. An informed consumer must know how he makes decisions. And I think there is also great questions of labeling, standards, extra is also part of the, hopefully there will be convergence on that.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Katrin?
Thank
Your
you.
take?
Talking about standards, I think one of the Switch Asia has a huge regional knowledge, and I think there's a huge opportunity to bring that knowledge to the regional level. And I think we've been talking a lot about the this access to finance, and I think part of that is support for market development and aggregating demand, and for that is the need for looking at value chains as they operate across the region, so moving beyond national plans and looking at how we have some of those value chains are working across regions, and understanding the trade implications of some of these value chains. And I think bringing the trade aspect to these discussions, and then working on standards, standards for products, so there's that common understanding, but also not forgetting the reusability and the recycling, so that products can also be designed where they can't be, where there's still a need for them, so they can be designed for recycling as well. And then in terms of so the support for market development, but also I think having more dialogue between SMEs and financial intermediaries, and looking at opportunities for more signposting, both in terms of business development and access to finance. And I think being able to play that kind of role of signposting or translating between those two groups is really key. Thank you.
Katrin, and this whole issue of translation, knowledge translation, not interpretation, but really into the reality of different partners. So that's quite important. Thomas, I think it also relates to your earlier statement about understanding. So it's understanding comes again relating to the realities of the interest groups. So Kai, the word to you. So what are the levers for more profound, more ambitious, more change-oriented, more impactful SCP and circular strategies in the region?
Yeah, thank you very much. Since I came here about 4 years ago, I was also new to the sustainable consumption and production agenda, even though I had a background which brought me quite easily into the topic, right? So I could easily relate to it because I come from energy efficiency, I come from waste management, I have worked in all those places. So, and when here I saw in Southeast Asia, circular economy strategies popped up, but nobody was able to fill what's really in it. Like they were talking about everything. Some people were talking about recycling. A lot of people were talking about recycling. Other people were dreaming about Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and what actually the first agenda which really made me profoundly understand where changes can be done is what the European Union has done with its Sustainable Product Initiative as part of the Circular Economy Action Plan. And the Sustainable Product Initiative is, the objective is very clear. It says making sustainable product the norm in the European Union. And I think this is really something, this is a very ambitious goal, because our markets are flooded with unsustainable goods. There is a huge interest from the industry not to produce too sustainable, because planned obsolescence is a thing that the industry drives. So the European Union has understood that and said, we want to protect our markets, we want to have only sustainable goods. That's the objective. And von der Leyen also said, the circular economy and the Green Deal is our growth agenda. That means there's also a huge interest in saying, when we make products more sustainable, we're going to profit from it in terms of jobs, in terms of GDP, in terms of environmental benefit. You know, it's like there is a very clear policy objective to say we also want to profit from it. Just read an article, the transition in renewable energies alone has created 40 million jobs, right? This is like amazing when you think about it, that this transition has already created so much jobs, so much benefit. That's where the transformation comes from. I think when we talk about transformation, I would very much go what the European Union is currently doing in saying, first, we are setting minimum standards for products. We're going really to say, this is an eco-design standards. Everybody has to produce according to this norm, otherwise you don't enter the market. That, of course, talking about global value chains, is reaching all the way to Southeast Asia. Then they're saying we are strengthening the right of the consumer. Mushtaq was mentioning the right to repair. Suddenly, the responsibility goes back to the manufacturer who sits in Southeast Asia. Then we're talking about longer guarantees and warranties. So it means that different products, which, you know, a washing machine used to last 20 years, that's why a lot of businesses went out of work, because it lasted for 20 years and nobody had to do anything. Nowadays, the washing machine lasts for 2 years and you can't find any repair part and you have to trash it. So again, a guarantee for 20 years is a big difference, makes a massive difference in how you design the product. And I think these transformations are coming now one by one. I'm not sure how strong this will, I'm quite sure that will strongly influence the world, because it will basically go through different product groups and will ensure that the sustainability is in the design of the product. Think about a smartphone, which simply can be changed the batteries without, you know, opening it. It will last longer, it will stay in the system. And then a last thing, which I think is the real transition and the real transformation, if we change the incentives in the economic system. I think this is the most important part. When you are a taxi driver, you have a massive interest that your car is long-lasting, that it's driving all the time, that you basically have, that it consumes as little as possible, and that you basically make a profit out of it. Because all these factors, the car, the maintenance, everything is a cost for your business. If I sell you a car, it's all these things about the maintenance, about the fuel efficiency, is none of the interest of the one who makes the profit from it. So the question of servitizing everything is a very important aspect. We don't need a light bulb, we need light. We don't need a car, we need mobility. We don't need a fridge, we need healthy food, right? We don't necessarily need to own a smartphone, we need communication. So talking about what is the center of the value of a product, that is the new thing that really is changing the thinking.
Thank you, Kai. And particularly this last point on product service systems, so which is question of who controls the ownership, is quite an interesting business model. So we are talking about innovations, not only about it's not about technology only, it's also about the ways how you make money and through what kind of transactions. So, René, can I just ask you for your reflection on this question, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I take the risk of being less jazzy, but I think what needs to be said is that we need to work on compliance much more. So we have the fact that compliance is so lackluster, and we can say that in this room, is a major element. Being non-compliant is just too cheap compared to being compliant, and that is just a very underlying problem. So I would say we need to work on governance from the two sides. On the governance side, the governance, that we make sure that we create capabilities and also the instruments to implement our environmental policies, and not in the interest of ease of doing business, which is quite swaying across Asia, kind of do away even with these environmental rules and regulations, or say that we will comply if you pay. That's not the way we do business. So we need to really have a mindset change around this, that compliance is the norm and nothing less than that. And I think that has a replication also for this sort of the responsible business practices, which Thomas, you were kind of referring to. So we need to work much more on responsible business conduct, and that will also be enabled by the EU directive on sustainable supply chain. I still don't get the terminology right, but you know what I refer to. So it will just be essential to demonstrate compliance, and then we do not necessarily need the specific SCP tools, because we create the incentives which are really there. So really, this cannot be emphasized enough. It's not a jazzy term to discuss about. It's much easier to talk about sustainable public procurement or other things, but these are really some of the root causes. Then, of course, I represent UNIDO, that has an I in there, which is industry and innovation. So I would also say that we need to, with the SCP policies, we need to we need to come back to a bit of industrial policy and innovation. So there's nothing wrong about with all our research grants which we give, to just add a requirement. If you apply for a grant, explain how it contributes to SCP. So this will be a mind change for all the researchers. So you have to score some points on SCP, so maybe you start thinking about it. Let's be just blunt on this. And so there are so many other initiatives where you could say we could have research schemes or innovation schemes which are really just driven by SCP and innovation. And I think this morning we talked a bit about transformation. So what is the imaginable futures? We need to work on that. And in the industry policy, I think that is then a bit linked to that, to develop the clean tech industry. So I would basically say it's governance and it's industry and innovation. Thank you.
And René neutralizes his not very jazzy statement with extremely jazzy statement, because innovation is clearly of great interest to everybody. But one of the points I think which can indirectly sound as a recommendation, not necessarily doing the work on enforcement and transparency and accountability for Switch Asia program itself, but collaborating with entities which are working on that and who can take SCP agenda on board, might be probably quite a strong lever to create level playing field for those which honestly try to do SCP and try to compete with those which are sort of, quite frankly, cheating on the waste and emissions and other things. So thank you, René. Thank you. Mushtaq, the floor is, or the screen is with you on the cost strategies for upscaling SCP from your perspective.
Thank you, Zinaida. I think Switch Asia model is one of the good models where you have grants, you have the technical support, then you have the regional policy advocacy. Now, as I say that we were discussing about the sustainable products, whether we are talking about the compliance, we are talking about the green public procurement to induce the SCP or anything. But this all needs government interventions, regulations, policies. And without that, even all the good grants showcase cannot be scaled up. So enabling environment is required through government interventions. And for that reason, I think the policy advocacy remains the key, and that's where there is a good model that we work with many governments on the roadmap for SCP, on the action plans for the SCP, and then also the sub-regional groups like ASEAN or SACIP and so on. So when we are talking about co-strategizing, I think it's good to see, as yesterday also mentioned, the 5-year development plans of the government, their global commitments with the SDGs, with the Paris Agreement, anything like that, their national agenda, political agenda, election agenda, anything. And we can easily work within that to help governments to understand how they can really create enabling environment to achieve those agendas through SCP and by showcasing grants and other our technical supports. So I would say that we really should bring governments even in this room. I don't know how many governments are sitting in the room, but we should bring governments in the room to co-strategize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mushtaq. And governments are in the room. They represent sort of our stakeholders' work. So you are very well heard by people you want to address. This is wonderful. And of course, thank you very much for bringing the whole system and temporary perspective in terms of upscaling the SCP practices. May I, due to the limitation of time, invite only 2 or 3 comments/questions to the audience or from your perspective. And Cosima, can I ask if anything is coming from online? Cosima is shaking her head, saying no. So a couple of reactions or questions from the participants. Yes, oh my, suddenly. So Elodie is coming with the microphone to you.
Yeah, thank you, Zinaida. I wanted to just make a comment on the first question that you asked about expanding SCP, bringing in aspects of circular economy. The risk, as it came through during the earlier discussion, Renee highlighted about misconception, not using the term in the appropriate way. I think it's important, especially if a program is being designed in the coming months and weeks, to break down the value chain. If you're looking at a particular value chain, there is the production part, so there's sustainable production there. Circular economy actually starts to operate at the point of sale, not in the production process. And then comes the sustainable consumption. So if we read it as sustainable consumption, production, and circular economy, we're actually mixing up the way we would implement or the way we would deploy these potential solutions. So for the risk of sounding really clumsy, it should be sustainable production, circular economy, sustainable consumption. Thank you.
So the point is well taken, not to lose all of those components, consumption and production, for the sake of bringing the whole economy towards circularity state. So not to overprivilege one on the expense of another. So this is how I hear you. Very good point. Colleagues, anybody else? Quickly comment or question. Sam, please.
Mine was just a small comment, really. So I think at the start you made some really good points, I think, in regards to how we were kind of now seen as part of the conversation, obviously the work that we're doing, the impact that plays in the fight against climate change. And I think at the end of this year, obviously we're hopefully having an agreement between all parties on the global biodiversity framework. And I noticed there's one of the targets kind of touches on a lot of the work that we're doing. So I was wondering if people on the panel have any thoughts about opportunities, what kind of the Global Biodiversity Framework could offer to us, obviously how we can be highlighting all of the work that we're doing on sustainable consumption and production to support the delivery of that framework.
Mean your team or we as a collective?
As a collective, or even
As
as
a
everyone in the room, kind of what?
No, so I was more fishing for sort of an invitation for for us to partake in your activities. It's just a small promotion. Sam's work is related to behavioral change work, which is extremely powerful group with whom he is working, which helps us to design the projects and interventions in a way that is really triggers changed in the way people act. And I don't mean only consumption, I mean really at the management, production, etc. level. So, but I think that clarification is required from you. So what kind of systems you mean? So the panel is asking.
Yeah,
to
my
elaborate,
question,
please.
it was more relation, I think obviously there's a lot of clear linkage, I think, in all of our heads between the work that we're doing and the impact that has, for example, on climate change. And, you know, conferences like the UNFCCC, the World Climate Change Conference. And this year, we're having world leaders finally getting together for the postponed biodiversity conference. And I think as well, I'm wondering, are we making the strong enough link as well as the impact all of our work has on climate change? I think it can have really positive impacts on global biodiversity. So I wondered if anyone had any thoughts there about how we can use that as an opportunity to champion our work.
Well, I think this part of the table sort of already raising their microphone competing to answer your question. So Kai, and then towards Katrin, please.
Yeah, I think this is super important. That we start to not think in silos and that we stop thinking in silos, because, as you all know, we are facing this multidimensional crisis, and one of the big gray rhinos that is charging just against us is biodiversity, right? We all know it. Nobody's acting on it. Well, I'm being a little bit prestigious. But I think what happened is that in the last years, everybody was thinking about CO2 emission as the new currency. And so we brought circular economy with CO2 together, right? And we tried SCP and CO2, right? Now the currency will be biodiversity, and now we have to basically bring our agenda also into the biodiversity agenda. And what's happening, I mean, it's happening already quite strongly when it comes to plastic. One of the topic that, you know, everybody when circular economy, plastic, you know, comes automatically into the brain. And there, of course, the whole question of microplastic, ocean pollution is massive, and there basically biodiversity loss is also addressed. And of course, then you can go through criteria which are related to wood, for example, where you say like, okay, sustainable forestry has to do with biodiversity, and so on and so on. So yes, you're right. We have to think much more integrated. What I think, Thomas, you said, slowing down the resource cycle and keeping materials in circle is by default biodiversity positive, right? I think that's also the issue that we have to, the point that we have to do.
Just a small strategy to accelerate this session, because I'm getting notes that we need to be concise, so the time is of value. Kai and the rest of us who are commenting now on this question, as well, can I just throw in the basket another question for you to answer at the same time? And this is a question which Alessandra is particularly looking forward to. So what kind of recommendation, 1-point recommendation you would get to Switch Asia for the future activities to upscale and mainstream SCP towards circular economy? So Kai, you can just give this reflection right now, thinking on your feet or on your seat.
So the recommendation to Switch Asia, I think we all are aware that we should unite the grant component better with the policy component. I think that is of utmost importance. I think everybody is aware. I very much like that you are concentrating on certain value chains, so we can concentrate in the different countries on the same value chains and can learn collectively, so that there's a real transferability. So that's the second point. The third point is the access points via the SCP focal persons sometimes is limiting the stakeholder management, because especially circular economy and SCP is such a transversal ministry transversal agenda that you a lot of times have to have the Ministry of Industry in there, you have to have the Ministry of Environment, you have the big planning ministries, the Bapanases of the world, you have to have Ministry of Finance when it comes to public procurement in there. So there are so many different actors that a lot of times just accessing via the focal point is not enough. And that's why you need the structures, you need the networks on the ground. And we are offering as GIZ basically our support also to get to these networks.
Thank you very much, Kai. So, Alessandra, National Focal Point Plus system. Yeah. So, René, Katrin, Mushtaq, you will be answering also those two questions, reaction to Sam,
I think the comments in the room are quite clear. So, I started on it's a converging agenda between the triple planetary crisis, and we see more terminology coming now, carbon neutral, nature positive as the new currency kind of thing. So, and I think there's many opportunities, and maybe in the SCP domain we should look more at how we can create value out of biodiversity. So if we talk where I used to work, where I work right now, what is the biodiversity value of the Himalayas, and how can we capitalize some of that? So that would be my recommendation. And I think we don't need to add too many words as circularity. It doesn't get easier with adding more words, Rajat. I think that we can just try to explain it, and I think in Thailand we use now circular, bio and green, which is basically the three strategies which you also mentioned, Zinaida, earlier on. I think in terms of moving forward with Switch Asia, I mentioned in my earlier intervention basically governance and industry. I think I have one more suggestion which I would add, and that is more looking at the institutionalization of issues. I see that the grant projects are ad hoc issue-based coalitions, but they are not necessarily sustainable in that way. And I think that in that sense it's a lot of good work, but it doesn't necessarily get sufficient carry forward. So that means that institutionalization needs to take place at some level. But I'm also very scary with institutionalization, because many people would immediately say, oh, we create it's a brick and mortar type of thing. We create an institution, appoint a director and a driver, and then we have another bottleneck in the system. So we need to think about institutionalization more, and what are the facilitating processes so that we get appropriate business development services or SCP ecosystem established beyond just the demonstrations, but we need an ecosystem to be set up. And I'm not quite sure whether just the grant instrument of grant projects is sufficient for that, or whether we need to look at other mechanisms which are kind of a longer term strategy for institutionalization and facilitation of change. Thank you.
Nature side, the multilateral development banks are in the process of discussing a taxonomy around what is nature positive, building on different things. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and at the risk of bringing in another word, I think regenerative is really important in terms of thinking about bringing in that circularity and making sure that you're thinking about the regeneration of natural resource use. I would like to build on what René said. I think in terms of looking for those opportunities for a network approach around regional dialogue, and really identifying, I guess, a couple of areas where the inputs and the convening power of Switch Asia can help to move that dialogue along, and also aggregating data and information that you've got in a way that is a resource for people to come to. And I think also building on Kai's point, I think there's a huge opportunity to be able to say what's happening in this country and use Switch Asia as a resource to do that. And so again, thinking about how we can make those entry points really scale and easy for people to access.
Thank Very much. Can I just, Thomas, ask you to take the last intervention, most impactful usually, and invite Mushtaq to come first, please.
Sure. You know, listening to all this, it reminds me of this famous Thai saying, same, but different. When I first trip came to Thailand, just a little bit digression, I was like a tourist, and this guy came and sells me this whole postcards and say, this is 100 baht. Then I walk a little bit, this and I didn't want. Another guy came and said, same photos. He says 150 baht. I said, what is this? 100 baht, 150 baht? What? He said it's same but different. Photo, the picture, the same. But that one, 100 baht, after 6 months, no more picture. Mine, 6 years also got picture. So I think we will have to talk about what is same. Is our understanding of what is sustainable procurement, sustainable things. So I think the question you asked also, because my understanding of circular economy includes regeneration of nature, and biodiversity is part of it. And we also talk about eliminating waste and pollution, and circular economy is circular thing. So I think what is really the target is this. And the problem is every country, every government wants to, and every individual in this region want to improve their lives. And the only way you can improve your lives is to create wealth. And how do you create wealth? You have to, we get companies, and a lot of our governments invite investments, lower environmental standards, even human rights standards in order to attract things. So we will have to say very clearly that you can create wealth, there will be same standards, everybody has to obtain the same standard, but we are different in the approaches we take, basically on local conditions. So if I would have to tell Switch Asia, which I am not qualified to tell, but I will still do it, is to have a local context as well. We don't change the standards, but have a local approach, because everybody speaks different. In ASEAN, there are 10 countries. We are so different in political situations, structure, geography, GDP, everything. I mean, we have countries with one-party states, absolute monarchy, military governments, quasi-democracies, all kinds of things. And we have geographies and everything. So economic development is also different. So that's one. The other point is that eventually, if you want to have circularity, you want to have things, we have to work on mindset change. And that mindset change would have to come from the consumer behavior. So we will also have to attract consumers to change the mindset, because they create the demand for this. So I think we really have to focus on governments, because governments send laws, and they legislate, but get them also to enforce those laws. Because there's no use having good laws without enforcement. It's a question of compliance and transparency and things. And at the same time, I think we have to get businesses to come and act responsibly. You cannot get businesses. Today we have the whole range of things. A lot of people pick and choose what they're good at and broadcast how wonderful they are, but they may not be good in other things. So I think we will have to also ask them to take a holistic approach. And as a whole, I think that is the Switch Asia will be very successful if we can have a system of a mindset change that we become norms. I think I liked, for example, the Sustainable Product Initiative of you is a great initiative, but eventually to succeed is people have it as a norm. Just a small digression. I come from Singapore. When I was a little boy, we were very corrupt. I mean, my parents used to pay a tip to the postman. He brings a registered letter. We tip everybody in the hospital. We tip guys. Overnight, there was legislation that says you're corrupt. If you pay a bribe, you pay a gratuitous payment. There's used to be big boards say any payment of tips is considered bribery and you go to jail. 5,000. Overnight, it stopped because of legislation. Today, it becomes ingrained. We don't. We are we're a fine nation. We have a fine for everything, whether you are littering, smoking, or whatever. But it creates a whole mindset change that even when you go overseas and everybody throw rubbish, you put it in your pocket. So I think we will have to work on a system of having mind change, that we internalize the value of our planet Earth. We have to go and people think that we are doing a favor for planet. I think the message must be very clear. The Earth will still be there. if we don't take care of the earth, it's the people that disappears. And I think we want for our future of our children and grandchildren, we just have to do the right thing, and we have to start now. And if we can get Switch Asia to understand that, eventually consumer behavior will pressure governments and businesses to change, because they can't stay in power if the voters and their citizens think differently.
Thank you. And of course, Switch Asia, together with other partners which have similar mindset and also instruments and tools, because Thomas, you speak about changing of mindset, at the same time speaking about the system to sustain this or until it's ingrained, isn't it? So that's wonderful. Mushtaq, you're last to reflect on Sam's point and or give recommendation to Switch Asia for more effective, more impactful work ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, that's basically my recommendations are in continuity, what is being discussed by Thomas or Rene or here or everyone. So learning from the experiences, because we have been doing Switch Asia for more than 10 years. And also we have seen many transitions also, like now in the UN reforms, we work very closely with the UN country teams. So the country priorities are becoming very, very important. Same with the Switch Asia, our transition was to work more closely with the EU delegation. So again, to the country priorities for each respective countries. So my suggestion or recommendation based on the learning would be that if we can have an assessment of the country priorities from the EU delegations and also from the UN country teams and from the governments, three parties, and then based on that, EU can design the grants, and then based also that how to scale up grants to EU to work or design advocacy part, whether it be the policy advocacy, whether it be the technology advocacy or technology transfer, whether it be the sustainable financing, or whether it be the business models and so on, including the product as a service, as Kai was mentioning. So basically the point is that it's very important to have upfront country priorities or sectors even, like one country, maybe transport is a major sector, other infrastructure, food, and so on, and then organize the grants. But more important, how to scale up or how to see the 5-year roadmap for the grants to be the integral part of the SCP in the country. So this is important that we start work with the EU delegations, UNCTs, and country governments to get the priorities, identify this, and set the whole model for Switch Asia 3. Thank you.
Which brings us to the end. Thank you very much, Mushtaq. I would be foolishly ambitious to try to summarize the discussion which has been there, because our speakers are really having a rather distilled and concentrated and informed clearly by the previous discussions in their organization and in this conference views from different perspectives. While my only small observation is clearly what we are saying, there is a requirements for and opportunity for convergence of agendas, different agendas, and then different partners which were not really that keen on discussing SCP or circular economy are coming to the table, and this is really the time to revisit the whole system, revisit the relations, redefine the rules of the game, so the barriers are low now. Interest is here, people are coming, and it's time really to see how we are to move forward and towards what kind of desirable outcome. With this, let me thank very much our panelists. Job great done, very interesting and impactful. I hope, Alessandra, it is useful. And also thanking the audience for their contribution and turning the floor to the next panel discussion. Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't see the, please, you have one more intervention. It's that bonus, or how you call tip. It's informational tip,
Yeah.
not corruption, tip.
Exactly. Actually, I like to comment on what I mean. Broadly, I agree with all the recommendations, but what Thomas said, that standards may be fixed and approach may be different. So what we have experienced in Pakistan is that it has to be incremental compliance to the, say, from voluntary to graduated compliance of these standards. So it is very, very important to realize that, because the level of economy and the technological state varies from country to country. So goalpost may be the same, goalpost may not vary, but the roadmap to achieving the goalpost may be flexible, not just even the approach, but even the what we did to achieve the compliance standards, environmental compliance standards. It has started with the thinking that it should start hurting and then biting and then bleeding. So, you know, the graduated approach to achieve the target has to be very well realized. You cannot really force to comply immediately and hope or expect the results to come about. It will take little time. All countries will have to develop their own roadmap to achieve the goalpost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. In fact, it resonates very well with our breakout discussion, not to be naive about the fact that transition will be serious and serious changes would need to take place, and roadmaps and the process needs to be there. But in terms of culturally appropriate and locally relevant, let us say it would be unity in diversity. Thank you. Thank you to the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much to this panel for these fascinating discussions. I'll now invite Cosima for the next panel, and she will be moderating a group of 3 experts. Miss Melanie Kengen, who is from the EU delegation to Thailand. She's the expert on blending and investment for the region. Mr. Sanjoy Sanyal is a Switch Asia assignment expert for India. And finally, Mr. Victor Abainza, Senior Consultant for the ADFIAP Consulting Group. I invite you to join Cosima and Melanie on the dais. Mr. Sanyal and Mr. Abainza. Yes, thank you. As everybody's finding their spot, I'd like to inform you that Mr. Sam Gray is offering a discount for all participants of Switch Asia to his behavioral change trainings. Maybe you want to add a word about this so it becomes clear to everyone.
I meant to mention it yesterday and forgot, so sorry. Yes, so just to highlight, so we're one of the projects that involved in the Switch Asia grant side, and our kind of focus is on behaviour change and the role that behaviour change can play. And next month, I think it's October the 18th, we have a 3-day online virtual training, which is all about behaviour-centred design and basically how we can use behaviour science to fulfil kind of the goals and objectives of our projects through Switch Asia. So if anyone has any questions or want to know more, I'll be here afterwards. So come and ask me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. And I highly recommend this session. We have also actually witnessed a part of it from the Switch Asia team, and it's really quite inspiring. So I'm very glad to be back as moderator with another very distinguished panel. I'm joined by Mr. Vic Abainza, who is here as a consultant from the ADFIAP Consulting Group. ADFIAP stands for the Asia Association of Development Finance Institutions of Asia and Pacific. Yes, sorry, that's so most difficult abbreviation for today. I'm also joined by Melanie Kengen, who works for DG INPA here at the EU delegation in Bangkok and oversees both investment and finance topic for the entire region, and also Sanjoy Sanyal, who has been working quite closely with the Switch Asia SCP facility on financing topics, and has also advised both in terms of grant financing as well as at the higher level with regard to development financial institutions, and also the Switch Asia program, how to better integrate financing aspects. And Sanjoy, I would actually like to start with you, because you have also seen the different aspects of financing that our grants require. What are the typical SCP relevant interventions that are in need of financing? And where does this financing typically come from? Yes.
So I'll try and keep answers short so that we can keep moving. I mean, obviously, in the first slide that we saw today about what Switch Asia is doing, right? The topics were, for example, are plastics. The topics are circular economy. The topics are ecotourism, sustainable textiles, and so on and so forth. All of those require financing. Some of them have more financing available and some less. So, for example, biodiversity today, I mean, since the topic was discussed in the last panel, has very little financing available today from commercial sources. On the other hand, for example, some aspects of circular economy have far more financing available from private commercial sources. In general, I would say in the ASEAN region and in Asia in general, there is a fair amount of private sector financing available today, and it's actually often a little difficult to get in development financing, which is in a bit of a contradiction in terms, and we can discuss this a little bit. But there is quite a bit of private sector financing available in sectors such as, let's say, textiles or something like that. The problem, however, is in the harder sectors like biodiversity.
And with regard to the projects that are typically being financed as part of the Switch Asia grant projects, we have, of course, projects that focus on resource efficiency. We have projects that focus on pollution prevention, also in terms of adhering to potentially higher government standards. For example, in India, with regard to textile and affluent management, water management, etc. Do you see financial institutions, local SME banks willing to also finance these types of interventions, so to speak, these types of projects where the immediate business case is not entirely clear?
Yeah, so I've got quite a bit of experience in those topics, resource efficiency and pollution control in both, not you said India, but also in Bangladesh, very similar issues there. And I think, you know what, my answer is yes. Banks are very, very willing to finance these initiatives, and they don't look at the business case from the economics of putting up an effluent treatment plant. They look at the business case from what happens if the effluent treatment plant is not set up. So if the government regulations are strict enough, and they will close the plant down, or in the case of, let's say, the garment industry, the international buyers will close their orders down, they will finance the project, because everybody gets that. The entrepreneur gets that, and the financier gets that.
So as long as there is enough pressure in terms of governance, then this is also when financial institutions step in.
Yeah, there's enough pressure in terms of the pressure is not on the financial institutions. The pressure is really on the entrepreneur. Though, of course, the government may well say that if something doesn't have an effluent treatment plant, it is under the no category.
Yes, absolutely. So this to our understanding is financing greening of enterprises, but there's of course also the aspect of financing green enterprises. So these might be enterprises that have different business models as Kai related to these service type provisioning business cases rather than production business cases. Vic, in your experience, what are the typical innovative financing instruments that can contribute to solving the typical challenges that these types of new businesses also face in terms of risk, in terms of potentially not very long business experience or even existence, or in other terms of the challenges that they typically have?
First, hello. Yeah. First, let me start by saying that in today's world, there's a lot of nomenclatures. There is a lot of alphabet soup running around the room in terms of ESG, ESEA, ESRM. And also, lately, there is a lot of a palette of colors regarding certain types of economy. There's the blue economy, there's the green economy, and there's the brown economy, which typically for financial institutions would have different sets of financing products and services. But basically, what financial institutions would need would be the business case, that there's enough sense of profitability, and at the same time, the risk-reward system that they are looking into the business model is being returned in their business model or in their lending proposition. So I think that's one effect or to your question.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to also ask for your experience with working also in the Asian region. What are in your experience the typical challenges for financial institutions, kind of understanding either the greening of businesses or green business cases?
In our experience, one of the critical component of having a green financing operation within a financial system is the buy-in of management, of top management. There has to be a champion within the financial system that would show the way on how sustainable financing should be undertaken. So aside from being entrepreneurial, he has to have that vision that vision that through this business, it should not only be profitable, but also sustainable. So there has to be that balance of sustainability and profitability. The next problem or challenges faced by financial institutions at this point is that the lack of capacity, both at the institutional level, some of the loan officers or their credit systems are not yet attuned to ESG metrics, or what should they look into bankable projects that are involved in ESG or environment and SCP projects. And also, they would complain on the other hand that there are lack of bankable projects from the borrower side, which means that there is a lack of awareness of what projects can be financed by the financial institution. I think I'll stop that at this point.
Yes, absolutely. No, already point very well taken with regard to both the top management buy-in as well as with regards to the capacity also of financial institutions to understand. Melanie, with regard to important trends, and Vic mentioned one important trend, another part of the many concepts that we are faced with, the focus of banks, financial institutions on ESG, so environment, social and governance standards, also in their assessment of projects. This means basically that not just financial information, but also non-financial information is taken into account when making these types of financing decisions as a financing institution, which in itself is actually quite revolutionary. But so in addition to what we are seeing there, what are maybe also other trends in the context of financing SCP in Asia that you are seeing?
Yeah, it's working, yes. Well, I think green finance in general and the SCP in particular are gaining, I would say, more recognition in the region because we need to transition the economy, you know. I mean, especially in the post-COVID-19 context, I mean, we need to move towards sustainable production and consumption model. And I think in the context of the climate negotiation as well, there was a huge pledge of funds from the donor community. And now the question is, indeed, how are we, you know, going to roll out all this fund to help our partner country, let's say, fight climate change and respond to climate change. So for us as donor, I think the prerequisite is a regulatory aspect. I mean, I was, of course, listening to the earlier panel, and it was mentioned several times. So regulatory aspect, financial frameworks, from both ends, so from the partner countries side and the framework that we can offer or propose to our partner countries. And well, I would have maybe the occasion to explain that. So that is one thing, regulatory framework. Then the trend that we see, and again it was mentioned earlier, is the taxonomy, what we call taxonomy. How do we define what is green so that everybody is speaking the same language, like we understand each other? There are a lot of different taxonomies actually. The EU has done a huge work in publishing EU taxonomy. It's more than 500 pages publicly available to everyone to actually look at what can be considered environmentally sustainable. There is a list of benchmark, a list of possible result indicator, and I think that is really interesting sources and material for companies, investors, and policymakers as well. Of course, the EU taxonomy is not applicable outside the EU, but we believe it shows, it can really start a good conversation with our partner countries as well. I've been actually in some workshop on specific investment projects on ASEAN, at ASEAN level. I mean, big infrastructure project, not MSMEs, but, and yeah, it was interesting to see that Indonesian government, Thailand government, Malaysian government are having a conversation with the EU on taxonomies and all these benchmarks. Then I think, well, bankability of investment, also you mentioned it, and it is very important because we know that the financial institution, they will not, they will want to have clear views on the bankability of the project. They will support. And then, of course, the environmental, social, and governance criteria. Again, here, how to ensure transparency, how to ensure the proper reporting, because if we, as a donor, are financing SME support projects, we expect reporting because we are providing public money. And we have seen that this is not always easy because there are confidentiality clauses, and the banks have their own regulatory limitations. So all of this has to be discussed, and this is a lot of work to do actually to ease access to finance for MSMEs. But yeah, what I can say is that all these conversations are ongoing. So hopefully, yeah, we'll conclude on some of those points.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of, because you mentioned also that from a kind of donor funding perspective, there is just a lot going on in Asia. What are the most important interventions or programs that you currently have on the horizon for the coming years in that regard?
Yeah, so, well, as you probably know, the EU has several modalities. I mean, it's quite a complex institution. The most known is grants. I mean, that's what we expect the EU to do, is to provide grants. But I would say there was a shift in the approach because, like everybody else in the international communities, we have now clearly in mind that the grants, the donor resources won't be enough to bridge the gap for sustainable development goals. So the EU since 2012 has actually developed what we call the blending and investment facilities, which consist to provide concessional finance to our partner countries. So the difference between grant and blending is that the EU grant will be mixed with loan or equity of financial institution. So right now we are working with our EU member state banks, the development banks, such as French Development Agency, KfW, of course the European Investment Bank as well, to channel those funds to actually contribute to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And we did it in a form mainly since 2012 of technical assistance and investment grants, so which consist in paying part of an investment. And at the end, of course, if there is a grant mixed with a loan, it means the loan amount is reduced and therefore the cost of the investment is reduced for the end beneficiary. So that is really the objective of the blending, is to make finance concessional to the beneficiary. And by doing that, we hope that the government or the promoters of projects will actually invest in more sustainable type of product, because attached to this we also have, of course, environmental criteria. We also ask that it's more sustainable, more social sensitive, gender sensitive. There is a whole range of additionality to attach to our grant that we also discuss with the partners. So this was what we call traditional blending. Now what the EU is now starting to do, and this started in 2018-19, first in Africa and neighborhood countries, and now it's actually since 2021 also in Asia, is guarantee. So the guarantee product that the EU is going to provide is also via the development bank, and the objective of the guarantee is to share the risk of an operation with the investors and with the financial institution. And by sharing this risk, we believe that the investors and the financial institution, they will actually invest in projects that have more development impact. So this program is now at the level of assessment, let's say. We have received a proposal from the IFIs, and there are actually 6 different sectors in which we are going to work. Amongst these sectors, there is SMEs as well. And once we have this rolling, then there should be a possibility for hopefully making a link with some of the switch project, maybe the most mature one, which can pretend to financing in the frame of these programs. So
yeah, this is very, very interesting, because we have kind of the different levels of this program also represented on the panel, with you, Melanie, kind of from the donor funding financing institution, and then Vic, you are working very closely with the also Asian banks in this regard, and then of course Sanjoy, you work so closely with the implementing banks that you actually also get to see what SMEs need, and you also actually do work sometimes even directly with the SMEs with regard to the financing that they require. So before I open the floor to questions from the audience, I would just like to know first from you, Sanjoy, with regard of or taking into account the characteristics and the needs of the SMEs, how should local banks ideally structure the financing products that they offer with this guarantee kind of in the back hand? And then I would let you close, Vic, with regard to how local banks can go about kind of meeting these needs that Sanjoy would mention.
So again, again, a very short answer is that local banks should use the guarantee to provide, as far as possible, collateral-free loans to SMEs. I think that one is that one aspect, collateral-free, is absolutely critical. Now, collateral-free does not mean security-free. It means innovative mechanisms to trap cash flows, which and perhaps using the guarantee to use things like debt service coverage ratio, and so on and so forth. So which means that you asked me what the local bank should do, but I'll just add by saying what I think EFSD should do is to kind of insist that the guarantee they provide to the European DFIs, the KfWs of the world, should then be devolved to the local commercial banks. Because there's no point just guaranteeing the loan from a European organization to a partner bank. It has to move down.
I'll just first support what Ms. Melanie has said, that from what she has said, she has cited the importance of public finance and public development banks in enabling or in sustaining that developmental work for SCP projects. But this is not enough. There is a need for private sector involvement in pursuing more SCP projects. And I think that is where the guarantee mechanism, the blended financing schemes would come in, wherein the risk factor being provided, the risk assumed by private investors could be covered by the guarantee mechanism provided by the public finance, by the public banks or donors in the market. A recent McKinsey study said that by 2030, the Asian Pacific countries, there would be the green business opportunities available for Asian enterprises would amount to about $3 trillion US dollars. So that's a lot of opportunities available for the private sector to exploit. But how do we enhance that this private sector could access these opportunities? And again, I think we have to go back to creating that awareness within the market, building their institutional capacity to develop the project or pursue that project. And for the SMEs, maybe we could look for the financial institutions and for the donor agencies like SWIFT Asia to look at the value chains, because it's important that the value chains would support, would be more accessible to the SMEs in supporting that concept or that aspiration for a sustainable and sustainable society that we are looking into.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I would now like to open the floor for any questions or comments. And please just quickly state your name, affiliation, country where you're from, and also to whom you address the question, of course.
Cosima, there is online question. May I just read it for you?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So the question comes from Asel from EU delegation in Kyrgyzstan, and she's asking, is it possible to support this development of green taxonomy in Central Asian countries within the framework of a policy support component? I would like to open maybe this question because it would be interesting. What does it take to develop this sort of taxonomy, and how locally distinguished it should be, or is it rather universal and translations are available in multiple languages? So what is the process of developing it, and whether indeed support is necessary, or those kind of documents are already available for public use? Thank you.
That is a very interesting question. Who is volunteering? Sanjoy? Yes?
I'll go as well. You know, I have poured through the 500 pages, at least 350 of them. One thing, and that's really the point, Vic, you mentioned about capacity development. One thing about the European taxonomy is that it is difficult for even European banks to follow, as you know, one Adelphi report we did. And that's where this, you know, your word about demystification is absolutely critical. It is important to sort of start in, let's say, Central Asia, to just define some entry points of what is green. You know, for example, you know, water efficiency in the Aral region. For example, reduction of pollution control, or for example, you know, energy efficiency that reduces the need for coal heating in Mongolia, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, simplification of this is really critical. We definitely shouldn't look for translations and you know, sort of using the. I mean, no disrespect to the European Union, we have to just be really practical about this.
It's working? Wait. No, I fully agree, and that's why I immediately, after I mentioned the EU taxonomy, I said the objective is not to use it outside the EU. But I think there are different taxonomies floating around, and we just need to agree on a common one sometimes. I mean, not even, I think, at global level, but yeah, when we work on a project, actually every time we look at a blending project, we have this conversation, because also depending on the country, you know, it won't be the same. So when you ask, can we have a taxonomy in Kyrgyzstan or any country, my question would be, is there a will from the partner country to have one? You start with that, because it's not for the EU delegation to decide that there will be a taxonomy on green financing. We can dialogue with the partner country, we can explain and maybe share some experiences, but at the end of the day, it should be owned by the country, not by the donor, obviously. So yeah, fully agree.
Yeah, absolutely. We have one question from the audience. And another one coming up, great. And another one. Please.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon, dear panelists. My question would be addressed to Ms. Melanie. So I'm Melody, and I'm handling a project on sustainable and equitable fisheries that is currently implemented in the Philippines by WWF. And in terms of financing, our role is to develop livelihood systems that are resilient and adaptable. And through that, we will be building financial schemes through a bankable portfolio. So given a while ago, during the morning session, we were talking about leaving a legacy, how projects can continue, how projects can be scaled up and replicated. But for the fishery sector, we know that it's very risky, and it's quite difficult for us to have that. So my question is, for the investments team, do you have any trade support plans or missions for the fisheries value chain activities or blue economy development in the Southeast Asian region, specifically in the next 3 to 5 years? And if so, how can grant projects have access to that kind of support?
Okay, yeah, I knew this question will come. So, yeah, no, actually, well, I will try to explain now where we are. So as I briefly mentioned, we have launched what we call a call for proposals, to be simple, to our partner IFIs. So we only channel our funds via the development banks or the multilateral banks. So as I said, it can be KfW, EIB, French Development Agency. There is also FMO, who is working a lot, the Dutch Development Agency with small enterprises and so on. So these banks have now worked for us in proposing project, guarantee project. And now we are assessing those projects. So we had opened what we call investment windows in 6 different sectors. The first one is connectivity, then there was MSMEs, then there is biodiversity, forestry, human development, sustainable finance. And so in the frame of this guarantee agreement, there would be a possibility of getting a guarantee, a risk-sharing mechanism support via the development bank. So as for a short answer, you cannot access directly to the guarantee, but you would have to somehow liaise with the financial institution that would be entrusted with managing the guarantee of the EU. So we are starting this work of making the link with the Switch Asia program that we think can be potentially a pool of very good projects, innovative, green, working on SCP, and so when those projects are, let's say, mature enough for next level financing, we hope that we would be able to transition them towards the guarantee of the EU. And that's actually why I'm here and that Alessandra called me here, so that I give you a hint of potential, let's say, future opportunities in terms of access to finance for your project. So what we would hope to do is also to work a bit more on how to make that link, because it is not going to be easy. Working on pipeline of MSMEs project guarantee mechanism with IFIs is also for themselves, is also not always easy, actually. And one thing I want to say, and maybe I forgot to say it, and it's very important, all these guarantee agreements are also accompanied with technical assistance that can help. So the soft component is also very important to help preparing those opportunities. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I saw another hand. Yes. So.
Okay, probably. You want to talk first? Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you, all the panelists, for very enriching remarks. I would like to hear a bit more on Mr. Sanyal. You have highlighted that about a collateral-free loan. So probably, I'm from Nepal, so I would like to share the difficulties, this about the collateral-free loan. Because it's, yes, commercial banks are there to make profits, and although within their CSR responsibilities, although they have to operate in the rural areas, despite the directives of the National Reserve Banks, they do not go, because that is not a profitable business for them. So it is very difficult for the SMEs to secure the collateral-free loan for them. And also European financial institutions are not there. KfW is there, but it is not eligible to provide the loans. So in this context, probably there's a missing link to work with the National Reserve Banks, who actually give the directives to the local banks to give collateral-free loans. So could you please share some of your experience from India? How can we probably capitalize this experience to Nepal to secure the collateral-free loan to SMEs? Thank you.
So I'll take that. Collateral-free loans does not mean security-free loans. All loans will have to have some sort of security. Because the bank itself has to be credit rated, right? The innovation, if I may say so, around collateral-free loan, whether it is in India or in other parts of the world, is to be able to what you call trap cash flows. That is, use for example, I mean, let's take an example of just to make it easy. You have a Nepalese company which is selling electricity from a solar grid to the the telecom tower Ncell of Nepal, and the payments that Ncell makes is in an escrow account from which the bank's loan gets repaid first. That's the type of arrangement that local financial institutions will have to put in place to finance sustainable consumption and production. For example, a coffee cooperative selling to a large chain, a company like a sustainable agricultural company selling organic cotton to a big buyer in Europe, and trade arrangements and so on and so forth. Without that, it is very difficult, actually, in my opinion, to promote innovation in any of these areas in the emerging economic context. actually in any context, even in the Western world.
Yes, please, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Iqbal Ahmed. I'm from Foundation for MSME Clusters, India. I'm managing a project funded by Switch Asia Facility, and the primary objective is establishing bamboo as a sustainable resource and generating green jobs. Now, in the project, we've created close to 2,440 enterprises, or we either strengthened them, and out of this, 2,063 are women-headed. And in terms of financing, we have mobilized a total loans of 2 million euros. And but the issue and the dilemma that I want to ask to the panel is, we have our own local resource organizations which are working on the field, who are primarily interacting with these units, and they are the ones who are responsible for linking them to the banks. Now, we realize that in 9 provinces that we are working, there's only 1 province which is able to actually link them to the bank. The remaining are actually linking them to the MFIs. So we wanted these units to shift from MFIs to the banks because of obviously the rate of interest are much higher in MFIs. So we analyze and we try to understand that why is it is only happening in just one state and not all of the states. And finally we realize that it is a different skill set. I mean, convincing a banker, it is basically on a trust on the person that the banker shows. And that trust is based on the past actions. So it's a different skill set. So how do we manage, on one hand, instilling SCP practice is a different skill set. On the other hand, mobilizing loans from the bank is a different skill set. So how do we tackle this dilemma?
Wow, that's a very good question. Sanjoy will is
practical question. No, it's probably a practical question. Vic, you want to take? Yeah, I mean, what a wonderful story. Actually, first of all, it's just such practical experience, and it's I think we can, Vic, you can also sort of reflect a little bit on Philippine conditions, bamboo, sustainable building materials, built by women's groups, and so on and so forth. My instinctive reaction is to sort of innovate a little bit and say, why don't the 5 people who are skilled in this, why don't you move them to wherever the headquarters of the financial institutions is, Mumbai or Delhi, and build a holding company which takes the loan on behalf of all the 200 enterprises? Instead of trying to get loans for every 200 enterprises, why don't you just bring them all together in one place, and that takes the loan, and then that distributes the loan to the 200 organizations.
That's financial innovation going on exactly at this panel. Vic, would you also like to contribute? Okay. There's one more question I see. Yes.
So it's always difficult when we talk about green finance asset, right? So I'm working for the EcoFair project from Vietnam, and we also have a component of green finance assets, and of course it's very difficult this time. Anyhow, but we see an initiative that I would like to share with you and to ask if there's any kind of support or activities in the futures. So there are some initiatives in Vietnam that some investors come from some foundations, some companies to join and to give a kind of collateral-free loan for SMEs who are working towards the sustainabilities. Of course, they have to check very carefully. They have a finance expert to check the companies, go through all the procedures. They don't need the collateral, but they will request the share, the profit from the company later on. In the meantime, not only providing the finance to company, but they also give a technical support, especially the market assets. So that is also appreciated by very well-established companies, of course. So my question is that is there any way for SAP network or for our initiative to set up a kind of more professional system for collateral free loan? But of course, we have to see both for the investor benefit and also for the SMEs benefits. Thank you very much.
Wow, I'm very impressed with your pretty financially advanced questions. Is anyone volunteering from the side of the panel? Great.
I think maybe the experiment we had in India would work, wherein our NFP worked through the, a cluster of SME producers, wherein they tied these enterprises, SMEs, to a manufacturer, which served as an anchor company for the produce of the micro and small enterprises. So, for one, the MSMEs have an assured market for their products. Secondly, the manufacturer, could guarantee through a supply financing scheme wherein they could provide working capital to these enterprises in terms of an arrangement, intra-company arrangement could be worked out between your bamboo producers and that anchor company, which could use or utilize the products of your beneficiaries. I think that's one way to solve your dilemma of getting a collateral-free loan, but which in the actual world does not exist. It is simply not in existence.
So, in the interest of time, I would actually now like to close the panel, but each of the panelists will stick around for the coffee break. So in case that you still have pressing questions, please do approach them. There's one final question, very brief one.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My name's Peter, and I'm managing the TorLink project, which is a project to raise sustainability standards in the Thai EU tourism supply chain. This is a really interesting discussion, thank you very much. We've just finished a report by the Greenleaf Foundation into options for Thai tourism businesses to access green credit. It's literally just finished in the last week. And one of the outcomes of the report is that there are about 6 different schemes offered by different banks for various different aspects of sustainable performance. But we touched on this in the morning. The interest rates just aren't attractive. You know, they're about 4 to 5%. Some of them are a bit over 3%. And so, yeah, it's not really an incentive. You know, the next step for me will be to try to organize some kind of a discussion or a round table with the banks in Thailand. But just speaking frankly, I don't see the scale of our grant project being, you know, having enough weight to really be able to influence banks. I mean, I can go there and try my best, but it's a David and Goliath situation. So I'm just wondering, you know, is there any kind of a common approach? Is the EU delegation at a high level able to facilitate a discussion or a space, and we can talk about credit lines linked to environmental and social performance across sectors? Because that might be really useful and save some time and blushes. Thank you very much.
Melanie, would you like to take this one? Otherwise, I can also...
I mean, I don't think there is such discussion at the EU because, as I said, I mean, at least not that I know of, because it would, or if we do, then it would be, what we can do is to foster dialogue with banks, which, as I said, in Asia, we have mainly worked on big investment projects. The guarantee projects are just starting, so we are hoping that such dialogue will start and will actually be more systematic, I would say. But I have like few examples of banking system, banking sector meeting. I know that there were some meetings with some central banks in some countries, but I think there is a big need for doing this work with our IFIs partners actually. And also the challenge is, okay, which sectors? It has to be EU priority sectors. So yes, it's I don't know if we could do it like on tourism in Thailand, you know, it would be probably a little bit niche, but most probably in the frame of this future program, maybe it could be also possible, yeah.
What we from the Switch Asia facility have seen is actually when we were analyzing the grant projects, and more than 60% of them actually have a sort of financing component, is that it's also kind of a trial and error situation, because you are the pioneers, you know, that get the financial institutions at the table to consider more than just the financial business case at hand, right? And so where we have seen that this conversation has worked well is really when there was also a convincing story to tell and there was scale-up potential. And I was actually just about to refer to you to one of our publications on business case financing. So these are 6 business cases that we found exceptionally interesting among the grants assessment that we have conducted, where you can also see, you know, how was the financing approached by these different grants. And we are also currently finalizing a publication on Switch Asia grants and financing, both in terms of their own financing component as well as the larger ecosystem, and that will be available on the website in the coming 3 weeks.
Cosima, I just would like to share our experience in Indonesia, wherein our project on clean tech financing gathered the banks operating in Bandung. We gathered them in one big hall, and they tried to present their financing programs along SCP projects. Now, we also gathered in the same room the entrepreneurs, those businesses connected within the community, wherein they went around the group of bankers, different bankers, banks, and presented their business ideas. Then the bankers would have to either select which to them at that particular moment in time would be sufficient to meet their minimum requirement for financing or further study. I think at the first stage of screening, several entrepreneurs or business projects were allowed by the banks to meet them in succeeding sessions in their respective offices. I think these types of dialogue could be worked out in the same manner with the tourist organization here in Thailand.
Yes, thank you very much, Vic. I think this kind of just establishing first contact and then trying to gather a more comprehensive understanding of what businesses are actually trying to achieve, and also then where the business case lies. That really is the key for all of the Switch Asia grant projects. So thank you very, very much for this really interesting panel. I've learned a lot, and I hope you too. And yeah, with that, we can go for coffee now, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cosima and panelists. I'd like to invite you again to go for coffee. Please be brief. We'd like you to be back here at 1:15, so perhaps you could get your coffee and return and say a quick hello to your friends on the way. Thank you very much.